Now we're recording. So 1 through 8, right? Cool.
That is correct.
I know I chose the wrong time to ask that question.
It's
All right.
okay.
Nehemiah 4:1 through 8. But it came to pass that when Sanballat heard that we builded the wall, he was wroth, and took great indignation, and mocked the Jews. And he spake before his brethren in the army of Samaria, and said, What do these feeble Jews? Will they fortify themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they make an end in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of the rubbish which are burned? Now Tobiah the Ammonite was by him, and he said, Even that which they build, if a fox go up, he shall even break down their stone wall. Hear, O our God, for we are despised, and turn their reproach upon their own head, and give them for a prey in the land of captivity. And cover not their iniquity, and let not their sin be blotted out from before thee, for they have provoked thee to anger before the builders. So built we the wall, and all the wall was joined together unto the half thereof, for the people had a mind to work. And it came to pass that when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabians and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard that the walls of Jerusalem were made up, and that the breaches began to be stopped, then they were very wroth, and conspired all of them together to come and to fight against Jerusalem and to hinder it.
All right. Thank you, Jack.
Mm-hmm.
So, this first section, we're starting to see that the work on the wall is being ridiculed. Okay. It's pretty obvious, straightforward. They were pretty. There's some that were very upset at the fact that this was being built, and they began to mock those that are building the wall under Nehemiah's leadership. And there's a lot of questions that are raised in verse 2, like, who are these feeble Jews? Will they fortify themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they make an end in a day? There's all these questions, and we know that the person who is asking these questions um, isn't really asking them for the fact that he wants an answer. You know what I mean? Like, he's not actually questioning the fact that they're trying to get these done. I think he's questioning the fact that they're actually building the wall, and that's making him mad. Sometimes you can, you're trying to start a fight is essentially what um, is happening here. Sometimes we can pose questions in a way that's obviously to provoke, and that's what I feel is the sense that he's giving here. Um, and there's others that are starting to chime in, and I don't know about you guys, but what tends to happen in the workplace is very similar, where, I worked in a lot of warehouses over the years, and all it takes is just one guy to start complaining about the job. And then next thing you know, there's another person who's chiming in, and then the next person's chiming in. It's contagious. And I think that's what's happening here is you have someone who is just so upset and angry that the Jews are actually starting to take back what is theirs, and they don't want it to happen, and so they're trying to start to stop the work. So that's kind of what I picked up, kind of a short synopsis there. But um, one thing that I did pick up is it was one of the questions, is in verse 2, will they revive the stones out of the heaps of the rubbish which are burned? So they're questioning the material, and I find it very interesting how resourceful Nehemiah and the builders are. They're using what's there. As we learned way back, is that this city was destroyed, the wall was burned, and there was all the wreckage, and Nehemiah wept over that. But they're actually able to. They're going to reuse that. So we see them repurposing a lot of the old stonework and reusing that. And so I found that was interesting to me. It wasn't like they had to go to a quarry and get all new material. They're being resourceful and to help save on time. And so I'm sure it must look ridiculous of them pulling out rubbish and trying to reuse these broken down walls and stuff. So you can probably see why they were questioning it. And then Tobiah, I love his question about, like, even which they build, if a fox go up, he shall even break it down. He's questioning the craftsmanship behind it. Yes, they were building fast. We know that, even from um, archaeological digs, and looking back at the wall that was built, they could tell that it was done swiftly because it wasn't like this beautiful wall that was finely tuned. Like, it had rough edges, but it was built to last. And we know that it was strong, and it held up, obviously, because there's still sections that held up today. Um, but it's just kind of funny how he's like, even a fox will go up there and knock this down, like just trying to cause doubt. So there's just some notes. I'll stop there just for my own sake. Does anybody have anything, just kind of on those first 4 verses that we looked at?
I like that in verse 4. Pretty much the um, what's the word I'm thinking of? The instant response there is to just go to prayer to God when faced with these trials and tribulations that are coming their way. It's not, oh, what can we do to fight against this? It's, all right, let's talk to God, see what He has to say, and move on from there. It says a lot about Nehemiah and the workers there, that's kind of their snap decision in a moment of struggle.
I was just going to note an observation. In verse 2, it mentions that Sanballat is speaking this before his brothers and the army at Samaria. And there's reason to believe that he was the governor of Samaria, the capital of the northern tribes, and back as far as Rehoboam and his reign. Uh, the capital. Well, I don't think Samaria was the capital yet, as early as Rehoboam, but in the next couple of kings after Rehoboam, Samaria was kind of the other capital city in this region. And so it's um, like history wise, I grew up on the plains, and there were all kinds of little forts along the river I grew up on, and they all jockeyed for position to be the primary trading post in the area. In the town I grew up in, won that little battle between a couple of forts, and so that's a lot similar to what's going on. Samaria and Jerusalem are on similar trade routes, and so Jerusalem having a wall and being fortified is a big deal because Sanballat, as it's presumed he's the governor of Samaria at this time under the Persians, and they found coins even across the Jordan that have his inscription on them. And so he was a fairly big to do leader. And so he's talking um, not only, just in his little group of friends and family, but as the leader of the next big place to do um, in the region. And so um, just an interesting note that he's talking to his army. So this is not just like a conversation that they're making fun of people. This is a, hey, let's get riled up and go to war. This is the movie scene where the general's trying to get his men all up in arms and ready to fight. And so that's kind of a big to do in this political rivalry scene here too.
I'll spoil the information that's going to be coming out later, but Nehemiah, it doesn't come up until, I believe it's the next chapter or later on in chapter 4, that Nehemiah is actually the governor, set governor of Jerusalem at this time. And so it's kind of interesting. You see this conversation that this other governor was having, and um, yeah, I think it's just we're so natural to have like this picture in our brains of like Sunday school little cartoons having like these little mini silhouette fights with each other, and it's not like real or anything like that. But like I think Dan did a great job as far as really helping paint the actual picture of what's going on here in the scope of things. Like you have literally these two pretty dominant cities that are essentially going to be dueling for trade routing, essentially. So I think that that's a great observation with that. I do want to back up before we move over into kind of talk a little bit about his Nehemiah's prayer. Just the overview of opposition. Sometimes, um, you know, well, I shouldn't even say sometimes, is that whenever we're faced with opposition, it's really difficult. And especially when we feel like um, that it's unjust, you know, I'll back up for a minute and just simply just talk about like God or pretty much gave Nehemiah the blessing to build this wall. But he didn't take out the fact that there was going to be opposition. That was still going to occur. And whether Nehemiah persisted through that, that's going to be on his shoulders and the men that are underneath him to see it through. And so we can see that in our own personal walks as we go through our lives, is that, God's going to lead us down a certain path in our lives sometimes. And there's going to be moments where we're faced with opposition as believers. And what do we do when that comes? Are we going to fold? Are we going to back down? Well, oh man, the first road bump that we get is that's what's going to do us in our personal walk with the Lord. And you know, I really appreciate the fact that Nehemiah stood his ground and continued on the fight, even though things did seem discouraging at times. And we'll see how bad things really got for them, and probably a lot of the things that happen in our own lives would seem a little minute according, if in comparison, but um, it really speaks volume to his personal testimony. And I think it's a great lesson learned for us as believers to not give up when these things arise, especially when you're in ministry. Um, it happens more times than not, and even amongst believers. And I think we could talk a lot more about that in chapter 5, but this is more in regards to outside opposition, people that are attacking you from the outside in. There's other verses that we could pull in and talk about. There's the verse in Timothy, in one of the letters to Timothy, about how, if we're going to be following Christ, I believe it's in Timothy. I'm probably going to get it wrong. Somebody correct me, but saying that as followers of Christ, we're going to be faced with persecution, essentially. And I could be totally getting the reference wrong, and I apologize for that. But we know that as a fact that, being a follower of Christ, it's not the easy way. It's not all going to be honky dory. So, long story short, I really appreciate his testimony there.
'Twas the night before Christmas banquet, when all through the lodge not a tractor was stirring, wasn't even dislodged. The lights were hung round the campground with care, in hopes that our guests would soon be there. The summer staff were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of campers danced in their heads. And the missus in her camp polo, and I in my cap, had just settled down for a long winter's nap, when out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from my bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, to open the shutters and threw up the sash. The boys' cabin's decor lit up the fresh fallen snow, gave the luster of midday to objects below, when what to my wondering eyes should appear but a miniature van. A family of 8 came near, with a little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be the banquet. More rapid than engine down a track, I cried and I shouted, we can't go back. Now appetizer, now salad, now entree and dessert. On chatter, on clatter, let's auction a shirt. It's for the children, item to the highest bidder. Going once, going twice, we have a winner. As the waiters delivered the food with such ease, it was common for our guests to ask, more coffee please. So off to the kitchen the coursers they flew, with an armful of Joe, and creamer too. And then, in a twinkling, I heard down below the prancing and laughing of each little glow. As I drew in my head and was turning around, down in the game room the kids came with a bound. Their eyes, how they twinkled, their smiles, how merry. Their cheeks were like roses, their noses like a cherry. The parents received a small break from the sitters so keen, and the craft they made were all cute and clean. I spoke not a word, but went straight to my work, and we sang a few carols, then I turned with a smirk. They enjoyed the cozy candlelight, the Christmas trees also brought delight. They sprang to their cars, to their horn gave a honk, and away they all flew once they looked at the clock. But I heard them exclaim, ere they drove out of sight, Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night. Where was it? No, verse 5 stuck out to me when I was reading, right there at the beginning, and cover not their iniquity. The prayer there was essentially, don't let their sins, their wrongdoings go unpunished. Nehemiah was like specifically asking, don't let everything that's going wrong evade you, even though it wouldn't, because God sees all. He specifically wants to bring that forward and make mention of it. Just the bit of passion that he shows there.
Yeah. And that's kind of like what I wanted to lead up to. Like, if we read through his prayer from verses 4 through 8 here, he's pretty much just asking the Lord for justice, really, for against what these men are doing against this project. He's asking for them to turn the reproach on their own heads, give them for a prey in the land of captivity, cover not their iniquity. As Jack was reading, like, that's some pretty harsh things to pray towards another person. I heard one commentator mention, like, that's he wanted to have the correlation between Old Testament justice versus New Testament grace, and I thought that was interesting to bring up. Where, if someone does you wrong, is Nehemiah in the wrong for praying for justice, or should have he been praying for grace, and asking, that the Lord would fix their hearts rather than pretty much crush them? So I thought that was an interesting debating question. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that. For me, I'm kind of a middle of the road when it comes to that type of conversation, meaning that I think when it's I think it's justified as far as his prayer towards a literal enemy of God, wanting to stop what God is doing. I think that, yeah, Nehemiah could also be praying for grace there, that soften their hearts or whatever he might be. I think it probably is more each situation is different, I guess. I don't know. I don't know if there's a right or a wrong way to pray towards God, but I do appreciate the fact that he did pray to God. He didn't take things into his own hands and just start wiping them out. He just gave it over to the Lord. And there's verses that we could turn to for that, that God is the one who will take care of everything and just give it over to him. And so I think that that's probably the where I will land, is just give it to God, no matter what it is. And he knows our hearts. He knows where we're at. But anyway, I just thought it was an interesting perspective about that prayer. Does anybody have
I would
anything
like
else?
to jump in on your question about the debate of, should we be praying for people to, receive judgment from God, or should we
Right.
be praying for His grace that their hearts would change and those sorts of things? And I think that while there is an amount of discernment, and you don't just want to be praying God's judgment on every person, there is some. So when we pray, we want to reflect God's will, and we want to take what God has given us in His Word and take that back to Him. And if it's something that we need to change, then we need to ask God for the power to change us. And if it's something that is out of our hands and only God can control, then we need to take and cast our cares on Him. And so, in this example here, that we hear, O God, for we are despised, turn our reproach upon their own head, and give them for a prey into the land of captivity. Cover not their iniquity, and let not their sin be blotted out from before thee. This prayer is very much in line with what God tells us about Himself. We do serve a loving God who wishes that all should come to repentance, and that is who our God is. But our God is a just, holy God who cannot be in the presence of sin, and we've received, grace and forgiveness from that, and we should want that for other people, and we do want that for other people. But the reality is, not everyone will come to repentance, and there are those who are reserved unto judgment. In Romans, it's a difficult passage, and it reaches into the whole, um, free will versus predestination and being chosen thing. But God has vessels for honor and vessels for dishonor, and He hardened Pharaoh's heart so that he would be shown to be the great God, the one true God who brought His people out of the land of Egypt. And so, as we pray, we need not to shy away from a God who is just and righteous and holy, who cannot abide sin. And even as myself, as I sin, it's a miracle, wonderful thing that God turns away and forgets my sin. But that doesn't mean that He won't punish me and judge me for my sin. That doesn't mean that I'm not responsible for my own actions. There are still things that, when I sin, there are consequences I have to face. And so this isn't necessarily asking God, oh, damn them forever. No, this is God. Hey, remember these sins. Make sure they don't go unpunished. Show yourself to be just. I know you're just. And in this moment, I need you to be just for the cause of your people, Israel. And so it's perfectly in line with God's will for justice to occur in this. And how do we know that? Well, eventually we see it later on as God frustrates their counsels and other things. But yeah, we ought to be praying within God's will, no matter how uncomfortable it might make us. And we should be praying for God to change hearts, but we should also be praying for justice, because a lot of people out in their world are saying, oh, where is your God? Either He's not, all powerful, or He doesn't love, people. And a lot of them are saying that because of the injustice that they see in the world. And if they would see and understand God's justice as it's revealed in His Word, their minds would be changed. But their spiritual eyes are darkened. And part of the confusion of that is the injustice we find and see in the world. And Job is a whole book about God. Are you just in allowing this to happen? Or is this good? And anyway, so there's just a lot there, and this prayer kind of it's good because it's short. It reminds us that we don't have to be so eloquent, but it's wonderful because it shows someone who's facing opposition and injustice and turning to God and saying, God, I know that you are my hope for seeing justice and righteousness happen. And so he's appealing to God's character there. So in this case, I don't think it's worded too strongly. In fact, if he there are lots of more strong things that you could ask for that might also be in line. Just praying that, you know, hey, the reproach, the shame that there's these shameful things, this discouragement that they're trying to put on us, Lord, let them be ashamed for those words. Let them, fall prey to the own devices that they're wishing upon us. So I actually think it's rather mild instead of rather intense. I mean, the psalmist prays, one of the psalmists prays, Lord, the evil ruler, let his reign be short. And back in those days, the end of a ruler's reign was almost always his death. So like that's an even stronger prayer, and this is, you know, not going quite that far. Hey, but I've waxed on far too long. So
No, I think that's great. I don't think that we really had an opportunity to really have something that popped up like this before, so I thought it was interesting to just talk about it. And it's good to talk about these things because it's like you said, I agree with you wholeheartedly there. As far as the strongness, I don't think that you would hear somebody pray like that in a Wednesday night prayer service. But at the same time, like, you know, um, there might be cases that come up in our future where we should be praying more boldly, for God's justice to be done and to not be, obviously with the right heart attitude. But, like you said, it's preserved in Scripture for a reason. And I don't think that just because you have an Old Testament, throw it away and just look at the new and just be like, oh, this is how you handle things. Because I know that there's churches that will do that where they just be like, oh, that's the Old Testament. We just focus on the New Testament, and um, we need to look at the whole picture. And there's so much that we can learn from. And so I don't think you went too long. I think that what you said is um, just hit the nail on the head. So anybody else have anything else on that? Wonderful. Well, let's go ahead and move forward here. We're going to get into verses 9. We'll take that all the way to 23, if you don't mind, Jack. We'll just finish it up.
Alrighty. Starting at verse 9. Nevertheless, we made our prayer unto our God, and set a watch against them day and night because of them. And Judah said, the strength of the bearers of burdens is decayed, and there is much rubbish, so that we are not able to build the wall. And our adversaries said, they shall not know, neither see, till we come in the midst among them, and slay them, and cause the work to cease. And it came to pass that when the Jews which dealt by them came, they said unto us 10 times, from all places whence ye shall return unto us, they will be upon you. Therefore said I in the lower places behind the wall, and on the higher places, I even set the people after their families with their swords, their spears, and their bows. And I looked, and rose up, and said unto the nobles, and to the rulers, and to the rest of the people, be not ye afraid of them. Remember the Lord, which is great and terrible, and fight for your brethren, your sons, and your daughters, your wives, and your houses. And it came to pass, when our enemies heard that it was known unto us, and God had brought their counsel to naught, that we returned all of us to the wall, every one unto his work. And it came to pass from that time forth, that the half of my servants wrought in the work, and the other half of them held both the spears, the shields, and the bows, and the habergeons, and the rulers were behind all the house of Judah. They which builded on the wall, and they that bare burdens, with those that laded, every one with one of his hands wrought in the work, and with the other hand held a weapon. For the builders, every one had his sword girded by his side, and so builded. And he that sounded the trumpet was by me. And I said unto the nobles, and to the rulers, and to the rest of the people, the work is great and large, and we are separated upon the wall, one far from another. In what place therefore ye hear the sound of the trumpet, resort ye thither unto us. Our God shall fight for us. So we labored in the work, and half of them held the spears from the rising of the morning till the stars appeared. Likewise, at the same time said I unto the people, let every one with his servant lodge within Jerusalem. that in the night they may be a guard to us, and labor on the day. So neither I, nor my brethren, nor my servants, nor the men of the guard which followed me, none of us put off our clothes, saving that every one put them off for washing.
Right. So we see that they want to stop them from building, so they are willing to slay them uh, to make sure that this doesn't happen. And so, um, just a quick synopsis here is that the Nehemiah and the Jews, they are hunkering down. They are holding the fort, and so they came up with this plan, and it is a very sound plan. It's not complicated. It's they had some that are set up for guards, and they would patrol, and you had some that would work, and so they just had shifts, and so they would just swap, and um, it's very methodical, even to the point where they knew that they were spread out. I know we talked in um, earlier chapter about all the work that was being done, and we had all those lists of names in chapter 3 and who was building what. They were not all close to each other. They were building different sections of the wall at different times, and so um, the fact that they had a system in place, if you heard the trumpet, you ran to the trumpet, and God will fight for us. I love that. That they were willing to put in the work. Um, you know, I think sometimes in our own personal walk, we can get to moments in our lives where, you know, um, we want to give it over to the Lord, but we kind of go too far with it, where we're just like, you know, I'm just gonna pray that God will get me a puppy for Christmas, because that's just what I really, really want. This is gonna be a horrible analogy, but I'm really good at horrible analogies. And so all I do is just pray, and but I don't look for a dog. I don't pursue a dog. I just pray that it will just magically show up on my front door. Now, we know that God is all powerful, and he can do that, right? He can, a stray could walk up or whatever. But sometimes we kind of have to, you know, like where the red fern grows, you got to meet God halfway, you know. And you find that flyer, that God opens up for you. You know what I mean? Like, it's stuff that you can look back on and be like, oh, well, there's 2 dogs for sale, and it's just the amount of money that I have, but it's over half across the country, and sometimes you got to work for it. And so I think that we see that here is that they're willing to put in the work. Even when it's difficult, that means that pulling extra shifts. I mean, think about that. You have guys that are staying up all night long guarding, but then they're alternating shifts, but they're still people that are still building at the same time. So, like, when do you sleep in all this? And sometimes you have to go that extra mile. You might not be sleeping as much as you would like, but God provides the rest when you can get it. And also the willingness to stand up for what for the God that you believe in. You could have, if you didn't believe in the project, you wouldn't fight for it. And these men were willing to fight for it and stand up for it. And so we see that in this later chapter of just the willingness to be bold and to stand up and to stand the ground when opposition comes up. And I felt really convicted when I was studying out this chapter, because I have been faced with opposition. And it probably wasn't until this past year where I just really felt like, oh man, why? I really started to question, and I'm ashamed that I was questioning it. But I was just like, why am I even doing this? If all I'm going to be faced is ridicule and, and legal things and all this other stuff that was coming my way, oh, I don't have to deal with this. I can get a regular 9 to 5, and I can just, I can just give all my money to camp. Like, I won't back away, but I can help from afar. All these different questions that I was allowing myself to think at the time. But again, um, I thank God that He has put me in this position here at camp, and those situations are not going to just stop from happening. There's always going to be opposition when you choose to follow Christ, like I mentioned earlier. And um, just praying, I think there comes a point where we just need to pray and ask God for the strength to get through those moments, and to understand that He has a reason behind um, those hard times. I wholeheartedly believe that that's how we do our most growing as believers, is through those hard times when we're pushed to our limits, because that's where God will really mold us, and show us what we can withstand if we lean on Him. Because we all know it for a fact that without God, we would just crumble. And there have been so many moments that I've been able to be a witness of up here through this ministry at camp, through church, and other moments of my life where I've seen, like, how did how did we get through that, or how did that person be able to go through that hardship and still be able to come out on the other stand praising God? And it's because they truly believe who they serve. They truly believe in the fact that He is the Almighty God, the Comforter, the one and only. And um, that's how you get through those hard moments. And sometimes you might not get answers for why you have to go through some of those hard things, whether it's the loss of a child or a loved one or whatever it might be. We might not necessarily get answers, but I think God shows us tremendous grace through those moments, and we can use that to encourage others.
One
Um,
of the Go
oh,
ahead, Jack.
no, no,
Sorry.
no. You started talking before me. Go for it.
Um, one of the things that's just really in this part of the passage, um, in verse 11, their adversaries were saying they won't know and they won't see it until we're right in there, and we'll kill them all and it'll stop the work. As you're talking, um, Tom, there were lives at stake, and that's why they were doing what they were doing. Is there were lives at stake, and too often I forget in our Christian life we do what we do as Christians because there are lives at stake. We're supposed to be doing certain things because there are lives at stake, and we don't. They, didn't even put off their clothes except for washing them, and even then they were still armed. Like, even when they were washing their clothes, they still made sure they had their weapons by them. And too often in my life, I put off my weapons. I don't take up that armor of God, and there are lives at stake. And too often I'm negligent when there are lives at stake. So as hard as it gets, we have to remember that there are people's eternal destinies who, hang in the balance.
I was actually going to mention in verse 12 about the Jews that came and told them of this plan that the adversaries had. Um, from reading this verse and just from reading some commentaries, there were some Jews that dwelt in these neighboring nations. And while they didn't come and help with the work, they did bring the information that they would be soon attacked. They brought it to Nehemiah and the Israelites there at Jerusalem, and they said it 10 times over. Like, they repeated it over and over and over, almost as if to show their sincerity and how much they wanted to get this information across. I just thought it was interesting that while Nehemiah was there inspiring all the builders to build the wall, that inspiration reached out to even beyond just the city of Jerusalem. It went to the neighboring countries, and the Jews there were inspired to help in the ways that they could. While they might not have been brave enough, or they were held back for various reasons from physically helping with the walls. They helped by providing that information that uh, probably saved hundreds of lives.
I'm just going to keep going down the verses. Daniel was at 10 and or 11, and Jack was at 12. I'm going to go with 13 and 14, how it talks about how the people were defending the areas right around their houses, similar to the sections of wall that they were building. Just how thoughtful that was for them to do that. They'd be more motivated to protect your family than someone else's family that you don't know. Just like you'd be more motivated to build a wall that protects your property than someone else's. Um, just the way that even if the people that were helping had selfish intentions, not saying that they did, but if that was the case, they would be more inclined to do stuff that was um, going to benefit them, and how that was thought through, but also just how he emphasizes in verse 14, moving away from the what you would be more inclined to do, but he just reminds them the Lord, which is great and terrible, just how he emphasizes the great power of God and how God will fight for you, which was mentioned in previous verses. Just the faith that is shown in what he says when he's encouraging the Jews to defend the builders, and that they just need to trust God that he will fight for them. Just it's a great example of, like you guys were saying previously, how we need to trust God in our lives, no matter what the situation is. He's going to protect us. Um, that was just something that stood out to me.
I think a great way to sum things up, just another example that was running through my head. And very recently, we had a pretty large brush fire up here in Northfield. And when the tones went off, we kind of just knew that it wasn't good. It was, I'm sure you guys are familiar with Mount Craig. Um, and right where we would normally go in and on the entrance for that trail, that was all on fire. And there's two houses that were right there. And um, we've never really faced anything like that with a brush fire where there were that much fire that was encroached on those buildings. But what ran through my head here is if the firemen decided to not show up that day, um, and we have got it's a volunteer, so you have guys that are giving up time from work, giving up time with their family to just to go in and do the work. Um, and we're talking minutes, from losing houses. And yeah, I understand they're just buildings, and um, the people were out and they were all safe. But as we were fighting those fires, I was hearing from our officers that were down below, and they were having a hard time getting water, and they were really in the thick of it, meaning like they had awful burns from the embers, and the smoke was just horrendous. um, and any normal person would have just walked away from that and said, let's just back up and just dump water on it. It wasn't a safe situation, but they were willing to put it on the line. They had all the tools that they needed. Even when we were working from it from up top, you know, we didn't have the manpower really either. And so, um, long story short, is there's another reason right there to just throw in the towel and quit. Um, and um, but we chose to push forward, and we didn't. Oh, we were able to save both the houses, and it's all by God's grace and the strength that He gave us to endure through those challenges. And I'll have to honestly say, like, that was one of the most scariest times that I've faced, just from the smoke alone, um, and even with just the winds and everything, like it was a scary situation, and the Lord really, I think, strengthened us to be able to continue to be a blessing to those families that had their homes there. And it turns out that one of the houses that we saved, a sweet little old lady, wrote us this really nice letter, and it turns out that her husband passed away not that long ago, and he was a painter, and all of his paintings were all in their house. And like, I mean, we that house was just moments from going up. Like there was embers that was burning through their screen doors, and like it was really close. But the point being is like, if we weren't there, those buildings would be gone, those paintings would have been gone, and um, would have been the end of the world. No, um, but we had an impact on somebody's life, and I think the same thing goes for our spiritual walk. I think that it's very easy to just kick back and not care and just be like, well, you know, I'll do the bare minimum and I'll go to church on Sunday, but don't ask me to do anything that's outside the comfort zone. Don't ask me to go door knocking. Don't ask me to hand out tracts. Don't ask me to be an usher on Sunday because I just don't want to deal with people. Um, and it's easy to fall into that category, even if we don't necessarily, even if it's a seasonal thing. Sometimes we might, um, it might just be for a season where we just feel like we need to take a step back. Um, but the understanding is that looking at these men that were willing to be on guard 24/7 and to put in the hard work, even when they were uncomfortable, even when they were tired and things might have seemed daunting, they were willing to put in the extra mile. And I appreciate that. And that reminds me of how much that we have an opportunity to do that in our own walk, where we can be on guard 24/7, being willing to go that extra mile, because we do have an opportunity to have an impact. If we, God can do it without us, right? We understand that He's an Almighty God. He does marvelous things. He doesn't need us. Um, we're the one who needs Him, and so the tremendous blessing that I think that we receive as believers is the opportunity to serve and to be a part of something that's much, much bigger than just who we are as individuals. It goes so much bigger, and it's such a privilege to be a part of serving God and to look back and the impact that that's left behind when when you serve, like even just a small summer at camp, right? You look back and you see all the lives that have been impacted through the ministry, and to think that you had a small part in that, it brings you joy. And it's really hard to really talk about that joy and put it into um, perspective, to really have someone understand what that feeling is. It's not that momentary happiness. It isn't something that just um, is temporary. It's something that when you think about those moments, it, it makes you feel good. And so just remember that as we move forward as men, like we have an opportunity to be a part of something that is much greater than we are. And if we're willing to put in the overtime for God, um, we're going to be able to witness marvelous things.
I just noticed something super quick looking through this. Um, just how they always, or right here, Nehemiah always gave credit to God and they trusted Him. Um, what was it in verse 14 where he says, "Be not afraid of them, remember the Lord." And then down in 15, it says, "God had brought their counsel to naught." And then over in 20, where it says, God shall fight for us. They could have taken credit, and he could have been like, well, our plan was so good that it worked so well and we did such a great job. But he was careful just to give all the credit to God, and he was like, God protected us, God brought their plan to naught. It was all God. So that's just something I noticed looking through here real quick.
It's a theme throughout the whole book. Is Nehemiah always gives it back to God, everything, and I love that. And what a testimony. I know we could talk way more, much longer on that chapter, but Jack, do you mind covering verses 1 through 13 of chapter 5, and we'll jump into that.
Sure. Starting in 5, verse 1. And there was a great cry of the people and of their wives against their brethren the Jews. For there were that said, We, our sons and our daughters, are many. Therefore we take up corn for them, that we may eat and live. Some also there were that said, We have mortgaged our lands, vineyards, and houses, that we might buy corn, because of the dearth. There were also that said, We have borrowed money for the king's tribute, and that upon our lands and vineyards. Yet now our flesh is as the flesh of our brethren, our children as their children. And lo, we bring into bondage our sons and our daughters to be servants, and some of our daughters are brought unto bondage already. Neither is it in our power to redeem them, for other men have our lands and vineyards. And I was very angry when I heard their cry in these words. Then I consulted with myself, and I rebuked the nobles and the rulers, and said unto them, Ye exact usury, every one of his brother. And I set a great assembly against them. And I said unto them, We after our ability have redeemed our brethren the Jews, which were sold unto the heathen. And will ye even sell your brethren? Or shall they be sold unto us? Then held they their peace, and found nothing to answer. Also I said, It is not good that ye do. Ought ye not to walk in the fear of our God because of the reproach of the heathen our enemies? I likewise, and my brethren, and my servants, might exact of them money and corn. I pray you, let us leave off this usury. Restore, I pray you, to them, even this day, their lands, their vineyards, their oliveyards, and their houses, also the 100th part of the money, and of the corn, the wine, and the oil, and that ye exact of them. Then said they, We will restore them, and we will require nothing of them. So will we do as thou sayest. Then I called the priests, and took an oath of them, that they should do according to this promise. Also I shook my lap, and said, So God shake out every man from his house, and from his labor, that performeth not this promise. Even thus be he shaken out and emptied. And all the congregation said, Amen, and praised the Lord. And the people did according to this promise.
So, there's so much to kind of unpack that's happening right here. But kind of a long story short is that they're not being paid to build this wall, and they have to provide, they have to eat. And so we're seeing kind of the economic side of things here is that, um, you know, there's some of the Jews that are started to take up mortgages, and so they began to try to just so they could buy corn, to buy food for themselves. They were um, uh, one commentator basically said that while this was happening, there was kind of separation within the Jews. There were the rich Jews and there were the poor Jews, and during this time the rich became richer and the poor became poorer, and those that were when saying poor would become poorer. It's kind of a sad situation here. In verse 5, we see that basically um, their kids are getting back into bondage. They're selling their kids, getting and as servants, and so we're seeing that. And so it's a sad situation. And some of these Jews were taking advantage of of the situation that was going on here. And obviously, we'll probably spend a lot of time talking about Nehemiah's response here. But they also, it talks a lot about how having to pay um, something. They have to pay their dues and taxes and all those types of things. That was all taking place, and so um, Nehemiah, we'll touch on that 14 and 14 to 19. It talks about his example and what he did for them as governor. But um, right now, this is kind of the uh, the issue that's going on here. Is that you have Jewish people that were basically saying, um, yeah, you can borrow this, but there's gonna be interest, and there's gonna be, they're being taken advantage of. So it's a sad situation. And so now we had opposition from outside, and now we're seeing it from within right here. If anybody had any other input at this point, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I would love to just Nehemiah is kind of a weird book because it talks a lot about the nobles and the rulers. And anywhere else in the Old Testament that you find talk about Jewish leadership, it's always elders, this, or um, anyway, it just calling them nobles is very odd in Nehemiah that I haven't really come across anywhere else. And if there's other places, I would love to read it. So if you know another place, let me know. But I did some research, and the word nobles doesn't really mean in the Hebrew doesn't really mean nobles the way that we understand nobility in our Western mindset, because we think of kings and lords and castles, and so the in the research the information I came across, this word nobles is literally just free men who own property. And I mean, back in medieval times, you were either a serf, which is a servant, practically a slave tied to the land, or you were a free man, and all the free men who owned land were nobles. So in English, this word makes perfect sense to use, but in the Hebrew word, it literally just means a person who's not an indentured servant who owns land. And then the rulers here is a second category of people, uh, people who are paid by the Persian government in whatever government job. So rulers is a group of people who have government jobs, and the nobles are those independently wealthy people who are not enslaved or indentured servants. And what we see here is as Tom was saying, the poor people getting poorer. It's worse than that. These are people who don't even have they have no freedom or rights as we consider freedom and rights in this market. Like these are poorer than poor people, and it's worse than being poor. They're selling their kids into slavery in order that they would be fed. So they're selling their kids into slavery so that they'd be able to eat, and when their kids have a master, they'll also be able to eat. And their starving times and the dearth that's talked about is probably some sort of minor famine that makes scarce food even scarcer. And so this is like a really bad situation. And these nobles who are Jews, they are not only, giving them money in exchange for their kids to come be their servants and slaves, but they're also charging interest on those loans, which in the law that God gave them, God said, you Israelites do not take interest of your brothers. So this is like really, really bad circumstances. And I think it's kind of funny where in verse 7, Nehemiah says, I consulted with myself. Like, it's just funny. Like, the situation was so bad, he didn't even have to ask anybody for advice and stuff. He's just like, this is so straightforward that, you just think about it and you know how bad this situation is, how wrong this is on so many levels. And so that's just one thing. The language always seemed weird to me. Why is it, nobles and rulers instead of, just, the elders and stuff, because in a tribal type situation you have elders and family groups, and this is nobles and elders. And um, if you notice in the law, um, in the Hebrew law, there was your family land was your family land, and you could sell it, but then you were always supposedly able to buy it back at the Jubilee, year of the Jubilee. So um, it's so these some of these nobles may have owned land outside of the traditional um, Hebrew lands as well, and so that might be a source of their wealth. Is they have lands back in Babylon or Assyria or whatever other country that they came from. So
Thank you for all that detail. That was like beautiful, spot on. Really helps uh, lay things out. And with all your talk about the nobles, if you didn't like the nobles with all that information, go back to chapter 3 and read verse 5, and then you'll really love the nobles. I'll read just the last section of that verse. It says, "But their nobles put not their necks to the work of their Lord." And so, just a reminder of what we just studied. So, not only were they taking interest and they were doing all these things, and they were like, "Hey, our servants can work for you, or the people that are under our control will work for you. We'll take all your money, but we're not going to do any of the work." So that really helps. I think for me, it really solidifies what we learned back in chapter 3 of it really speaks volumes of their character. Just awful, awful of what they were doing to their own brethren, and just a quick comparison into today is it's also a reminder of sometimes we can be so nasty to our own fellow brothers and sisters in Christ, even worse than we would treat a non-believer sometimes. And it's just, I think it's a little bit of a different circumstance. I understand that, but sometimes we can be very judgmental towards each other because we can come off it as, well, you should know better, and it's just really easy to cause strife and confrontation within church groups, within family groups, and so we really need to guard ourselves against that, and to try to do our very best to work things out. That's the hard thing. It's easy to um, talk garbage about somebody else, and to tarnish their name and to drag them through the dirt. But it's the understanding is that that person who you're offending, that fellow brother, um, is probably going through some really hard stuff, is really struggling with something that you might not even know about. And you have an opportunity to um, talk with them and to see what's going on, to try to be a blessing to them. But instead, like I said, it's a little bit of a different situation here where you have literally like these nobles were awful to their fellow brethren, and it's um, just a reminder how easy it is that we can fall into that trap of not caring about anything else but money, and we can let money kind of rule our lives. And it reminds us of that love of money is the root of all evil, and um, you can kind of see why that verse is so prevalent, because it can cause us to do horrible things towards each other, and to a point where they're even withholding, to a point where these folks aren't even able to get food. It's like you said, they're selling off their kids. Like, this is awful. So definitely something to not brush by quickly, but to understand that there's this issue that was going on. Um, I love how he handles this situation. We go in verse 12, and from my studies is understanding that when you um taking oaths was a very serious deal back in the day. Like, that was a big deal. Like, you did not take them lightly. A vow or an oath, like, and today, like, I feel like we take things way too lightly when it comes to making vows before God, and I think marriage is probably the most common one that probably would come to our mind, is like when we make a vow to our spouse. There are several people who have not taken that vow very seriously, and for whatever the circumstance may be. But to take a vow or an oath was a very, very serious thing culturally back then. So just understand that as we read in verse 12. And so when he called the priests and took an oath of them, that they should do according to this promise. And, um, so the fact that he was making them to take this oath and to do this thing was a big deal. And so, you know, you're not to do this against your brother. Sign on the dotted line. And that way there's a record of it. And so he was taking it to a kind of the next level. And so I kind of appreciate that thing. Like, like, wouldn't that be interesting if one Sunday, you know, you just have, like everybody line up and all right, we're going to sign this oath together. Like, let's just everybody line up, pass the clipboard around, because we're taking things to the next level, you know. Um, wouldn't that be interesting? But anyway, um, he took this very seriously. It was a big issue, and he needed to handle it with an iron fist, if I can use that term. So he was ending it as swiftly as I feel like as he could have, being the leader in this situation. So um, props to Nehemiah and the wisdom that he had to handle that situation promptly, because that wasn't right what was happening. And um, it really, this was a great way to kind of nip things swiftly. So anybody else have any other comments on that section?
I mean, you pretty much summed up the things I was going to say. It just seems like this entire situation was just a great show of Nehemiah's leadership capabilities, because he saw the situation, got mad about the situation, didn't lash out, but he also didn't shy away from it. He took a second, figured out how to fix it, then he went and fixed it. Just simple, straightforward, bang, 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 took care of it. And then, based on his authority there, it seems like everyone listened, and the problem was resolved to the best that it could be resolved. And it just showed how much God was able to work through him and give him those leadership capabilities, and continue being a great leader throughout this entire building project, as I'm sure we'll see as the chapters go on as well.
Yeah, I just want to note his great leadership quality too. If you notice in the end of verse 7, he said a great assembly against them. He used mob action against these criminals, but from a place of authority that was well within his rights. But he was like, hey, he didn't just go alone and say, hey, I think this is wrong. He had a great number of people. But I think the most interesting thing is he doesn't threaten them at all. He used no threats of force or violence. But verse 13, he shakes out his lap and says, so God shake out every man from his house and from his labor that performeth not this promise. Even thus be he shaken out and emptied. He, like, as much as he's in his place of authority, trying to lead people to do the right thing, ultimately he's like, God, you're a just God. I am like, and it's almost, he's not threatening them, but he very publicly is like, you realize that you are disobeying God if you go back on your word on this. And he very much brings it to a very serious place, but not threatening use of force or anything. He's just, lays it before God and says, God, now this is up to you. And And then just the response of all the people who had gathered, they said amen and praised the Lord. And it's a really neat passage.
All right, if there's no other comments, let's go ahead and read just those last couple verses, 14 through 19.
Sure. Starting off in verse 14. Moreover, from the time that I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah, from the 20th year even unto the 32nd year of Artaxerxes the king, that is 12 years, I and my brethren have not eaten the bread of the governor. But the former governors that had been before me were chargeable unto the people, and had taken of them bread and wine, beside 40 shekels of silver. Yea, even their servants bare rule over the people. But so did not I, because of the fear of God. Yea, also I continued in the work of this wall, neither bought we any land, and all my servants were gathered thither unto the work. Moreover, there were at my table 150 of the Jews and rulers, beside those that came unto us from among the heathen that are about us. Now that which was prepared for me daily was 1 ox and 6 choice sheep. Also fowls were prepared for me, and once in 10 days store of all sorts of wine. Yet for all this required not I the bread of the governor, because the bondage was heavy upon this people. Think upon me, my God, for good, according to all that I have done for this people.
Muted,
You're
Tom.
muted.
Thought I was unmuting myself. Maybe
There
I
you
was
go.
ready.
You're good now.
Thank you. I could figure out technology once in a while. So what I was saying is that I don't think he's bragging about what he's doing here. He's just telling them, like, I had every right to, as your governor, to take a portion of, and he lists all the things that he could have taken from the people because it was within his right to do that. Um, but he chose not to. And I gotta find this verse. Um, there it is. It's verse 18. Because the bondage was heavy upon this people. So, I'm kind of jumping a little bit further down in this conversation, but he really had a burden for God's people. He understood that this wall wasn't just going to build itself, that it was going to require people, it's going to require expenses, but he was willing to put everything that was given to him that was rightly his, that he could rightly take. He all put that aside just so that he made sure that that project could move forward, so that people could get fed, so that um, I can't remember. Um, I was looking through here and I couldn't find it. But he made sure that that this project was going to get done. I think that's the simplest way to put it. Um, it was truly for him. Um, it was a ministry. It was a project that was of God, and it was going to take sacrifice. And so he was willing to sacrifice those things. I mean, we know who Nehemiah is, and what was his position. What did we learn back all the way in chapter 1? What was his position? Who was he? Um, we know that with that position that he had with the king, um, he probably had money. He probably was well taken care of. He probably didn't have to worry about meals or anything like that, but he was willing to sacrifice it during this time. And I think it's kind of funny how he doesn't bring up the fact that he was governor until like it's kind of funny that we really don't find that out until like chapter 5. But he was ruler over Jerusalem during this time, and so the governing, and then that made me think about your comment about the nobles and um, using those terms, and I'm kind of curious if those were terms that were used um, um, by the Persian Empire at that time. And that was probably just terms that they were familiar with from being under their rule and under their leadership, and that's probably why we see it only in this chapter. But I could be wrong, but that was something that popped into my head. But just I love the sacrifice and the willingness to just um, to give it over to God and to trust Him for it.
Um, kind of a side note, but here in verse 14, we learn that he was governor for 12 years. So from the time he left being the king's cupbearer, the king had asked him, how long are you going to be gone? And Nehemiah set up an amount of time. And I just want to note that we learn later. So I think this section is a postscript that he threw in later to explain this situation. Um, but and the reason I say that is because we don't find out till later, but it only took them 52 days to build the walls. But he stayed there for 12 years and governed them. And so he really was in it for the long haul. It wasn't, oh, I finished my part, I made the wall, and I'm out of here. No, he stuck with them for the long haul, and how much do we need to be in it for the long haul? We don't just, oh, you said the sinner's prayer, you're saved now, goodbye. We ought to be committed to our brothers in Christ, for the long haul.
And talking just about the just the book in general and how it was written, it's really interesting just to kind of pick up just on the first 5 chapters. Is it's almost like it's hodgepodgey. You know what I mean? Like if you look at chapter 3, it looks like it's some sort of log that he just threw in there. And that was probably something that was taken of the day of who family was working on. It was almost like his notes. You know what I mean? Like who's working on what, and then all of a sudden we have these notes that were like, I was here for 12 years, and he throws that in there. Like it's interesting how it's written. And so I think there's a lot that we can, I think that's what makes it so much of an interesting read, is because we're getting like first person, we're getting like logs of, and then all of a sudden we're getting these the memories. Like so, it's kind of a fun book to read through, just for that. Um, well, anybody have anything else as we kind of sum things up here tonight? I know a little bit late, but it's not terrible for covering 2 chapters for us. But I think we really unpacked a ton, and really fun chapters to look at. Anybody have anything else in closing?
It's very brief, and it's just a parallel I noticed with the last section that we covered between Paul and Nehemiah, how neither of them took anything from those that they were staying with or ruling. In Nehemiah's case, just how Paul, he was a tent maker. Just the parallels there that I noticed. Figured I'd share.
They talk about not having enough money and, you know, mortgaging their lands and their vineyards and stuff. It reminds me of what I'm going through at work right now is there's a lot of sketchy business tactics that my company's doing right now, and all of my coworkers are just like, I need a raise, I need to work overtime. I'm just like, I can't afford anything. I um can't live off of what I'm making. And it just pricks my heart that it's like I can't have the same, or I shouldn't have the same thoughts. I should be thinking, oh, I'm just doing this for God. And um, this section has really made me think about that. I'm doing it for God. My job is what I'm doing for God. It may not look like I'm doing much for Him, but I am doing a lot for Him. I can witness to these people, and it's just been a burden on my heart for the last couple months um, at my current job. So.
Thank you, Kevin. And you know, I think it lends to us being a little bit more intimate and personal, I guess, as far as how that question was laid out. But I appreciate you sharing that, and um, it's I've really appreciated this study, and I'm finding more times than not that I've been really convicted as far as just how I've been living my life lately, and I think God's been doing a work on my heart, and I'm just I've really gleaned a lot from this study. So I want to thank you guys for sticking it out and seeing this through, and I'm excited for the next couple chapters to do. I know we're talking about maybe doing some additional little mini studies, and we'll mention those later on. But I think this will be a great way to sum things up. So why don't we go ahead and close out in a word of prayer and go to bed?